Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Renee Kernberger, our Senior Vice President of Development and Communications. And we're going to have a conversation today with some leaders from a variety of our programs at Pathfinders around housing. So first, I'd like to welcome all of my esteemed colleagues, panelists, and I invite you to introduce yourselves.
Thank you. My name is Janelle Medina. I am the New Paths Program Manager. So I lead a team of advocates who provide direct service to young people ages 11 to 25 who have experienced exploitation, trafficking, or are engaging in trading sex or survival sex.
Hi, I'm Milton Byers. I am a street outreach specialist here, now kind of leading the new and improved street outreach team here. So I'm super excited and just ready to get started.
And I'm Veronica Gartland. I'm the Housing First Program Coordinator. So I have a caseload of about 10 youth who have long-term disabilities and vouchers through either the city or county housing authorities. And I help to connect our youth to external housing programs as well.
And hello again, I'm Tim Bach, President and CEO here at Pathfinders. Essentially what that means is I do what leaders like you have here today tell me to do. So.
Yeah, so a lot of the young people that we serve are fleeing trafficking situations and experiencing homelessness and housing instability and have a hard time accessing shelters or traditional safe places just due to fears and due to trauma. Some of our folks who are housed right now are really struggling with maintaining employment or having income in order to be able to sustain their housing. So a lot of it is trauma around losing their housing or what's going to happen next, given that like it's really hard to maintain employment or even find employment during these times. And accessing funding and services is really hard right now for them.
Yeah, and I would add, for a lot of the young people we're encountering via Street Beat are young people that genuinely have no knowledge on how to even navigate what housing looks like as an adult. So a lot of them started off young and have had no experience to know how to properly do it. So they've either messed up along the way and have to fix it, as well as just having that barrier, like Janelle said, to employment and having a job that they're not miserable going to every day. And even finding out what their passions are. And then to add the mental health component that a lot of our clients encounter, that just they need so much support than just like, hey, here's a job, maintain yourself, but more like how to process trusting people and how to process trusting my neighbors and what if and not being afraid of community and space like that too. So that's kind of some of the obstacles we've kind of encountered as well.
It's really hard, I think, that when we are supporting young people, like applying for some of these funding sources or for programs, that they are having a hard time staying in contact with people or being able to get a hold of people. So you apply online or you apply in some traditional form, right? So you already have the barrier of a young person having access to some type of technology where they can apply, or a printer or a scanner, or fax machine, some type of technology equipment so that they can actually submit an application. But then when those applications are submitted, the processing time, the length of time somebody has to wait to even hear back is just like adding to that instability, right? Sometimes you have young people who won't hear back for 3 months. That's 3 months of rent, utilities, expenses, a bunch of different just barriers that a young person is accessing just to find out you're not approved or you don't have access to those funds. So then we're back at square one of applying for a different program or trying to find resources that a young person can sustain longer term. A lot of the funds that we have been able to access for young people are very short term. So they'll either pay the back rent or they'll pay a month or two of rent, and then we're back in the same cycle of just accessing funds, trying to find employment. So it's kind of like just this hamster wheel, for lack of better words, of just trying to just keep up.
And I would add that so coming into it, I came in on like the end of like the COVID vouchers that were kind of assisting with housing. And I just know some of the challenges with some clients that we had were like honestly getting people who would accept those vouchers. So even if getting them like through that process and having them like build that faith in that the system was going to support them, and then like they get through this, and then just finding the difficulty to get through that for the young people, and as well, and continuing the narrative of like COVID has like been mentally challenging for a lot of people too as well. So I think even those needs have kind of worsened, and just to be very honest, because I don't think there was a lot of mental health support before COVID, and it definitely has not become more abundant during COVID, honestly. So yeah.
Another challenge that just to add really quick, another challenge is, I'm glad Milton brought it up. So folks are getting some type of funding or are receiving these COVID rapid rehousing vouchers, and landlords are still having a struggle with, well, what income do they have? They want some sense of security as well. After this money runs out, will the tenant be able to keep up with the rent? So, I mean, it's something that we see in housing already, where folks have to make 2 or 3 times the amount of rent, which is really hard for a lot of the young people that we serve, let alone a voucher that covers you for a month, 2 months, sometimes up to 12 months. But then what happens next? Because you're still trying to gain skills, employment, stability to be able to sustain it.
What does that relationship with a landlord look like right now when you're trying to navigate these systems and get access to funding? You talked a little bit about who will actually accept vouchers, and then kind of on the other side is the relationships that we have that are a little more stable when you're in our supported housing work, when Pathfinders is paying the rent for young people.
Definitely. So I think that a super advantage that Pathfinders has when we're housing young people and we're paying the rent is we have those relationships. We do the legwork ahead of time to be able to maintain those relationships, not only with landlords, but other tenants, to make sure that a young person stays housed. If they are experiencing some type of difficulty, we're usually the first responder, so to speak, in that sense of how can we manage this relationship? How can we make sure that things are working right? And if things aren't going right for the young person, we can also have those conversations with the landlord as well of, hey, this young person put in this maintenance order and this needs to be repaired. That way we're also not only teaching young people these life skills for when you do live independently, but also making sure that they're getting the best housing support that they have. So I definitely think that housing folks through Pathfinders is such an advantage to keeping them, to having them stable for a long time, this housing stability. And then you kind of see the opposite sometimes when folks are housed without a program of having to navigate those issues that maybe, like Milton mentioned, they don't have the skills for, or never had to, have a conversation with the landlord, or, how do we obtain keys to the mailbox, or I lost my keys, now what do I do? And, a lot of issues that we buffer in our housing program to provide that support to young people, to make them comfortable, allow them to trust their neighbors, allow them to trust, relationships with adults when maybe those weren't there before.
I think what Janelle is describing is so important, because youth involved in our supported housing services, we as an agency are the safety net, not just for that young person, but we're the safety net for landlords as well. We make a commitment to both parties, to our young people and to the landlords who are providing the housing for them, with the reassurance that we will make things right and we will intervene and advocate and mediate wherever possible. And we have structured our services so that each youth has an assigned housing case manager, like Veronica, for example. And then we also have a housing specialist, which in effect is the case manager for our landlords. It's the go-to person on our team when there is an issue that we can step in to help resolve. And as Janelle is describing, often what we're doing is we are modeling and helping young people learn how to be more self-sufficient and independent. I mean, Milton mentioned this earlier. These are young people who have either not had those kind of experiences growing up, or the experiences they had were really negative. And so we're trying to change that script and that narrative and teach and help them figure out sort of how to navigate through this. I mean, everyone's brought up several times the issue of navigation. These are incredibly complicated systems that I don't think anyone should realistically expect our young people to somehow intuitively know how to navigate. As professionals, we struggle with how to navigate properly. Who are we supposed to call and who needs what? And if we can take the lead and help a young person figure that out, that's teaching them self-advocacy as well, which I think is really critical as they move toward greater independence. You know, the other thing I would just very quickly add, because it is such an issue that has been really magnified by the pandemic, is that our young people initially oftentimes struggle to get a job. And then the struggle really becomes, how can they keep a job? And we're talking about jobs that are in sectors that aren't even paying a living wage. And so most of our young people were in the hospitality or in the service industry, where they were barely making any money to begin with. They were the first wave of people to lose their jobs or have their hours cut. And so, and you have landlords rightfully asking, well, what happens when your support ends? They don't have reliable, steady income. So we are always working parallel on that issue as well. Because, you know, we do housing first, but that never implies housing only. Housing has to come first so that people are safe and stable, and then we can work on building their economic stability and their employment stability. But that is really hard to begin with. It's made much harder during a pandemic.
Yeah, I think that everyone has really touched on a lot of the important things that happen, not only with our clients who are not housed, but with our clients who are housed. A lot of those problems don't just go away, as far as the struggles with, you know, maintaining employment, or that they were not taught you know, how to deal with some of those adult life skills. And that's what we as case managers are able to come in and do. And so we were talking about the housing navigator. That's a fairly new position. So I have experience working with the landlords as kind of that position before we brought that new position on. And my landlords were, you know, some of the first calls that I took. If I missed a call or came in that day, the landlord is who I'm going to call first and make sure they're taken care of, because those partnerships are absolutely crucial to being able to house our clients. If we don't have landlords willing to work with us, we can't house our clients. And so it's everything from, hey, this client had, you know, an altercation with a neighbor. Can you talk to them about that? Hey, the housing authority didn't make their rent payment this month. Can you figure out what is going on there? So it's a lot of navigating both what the clients need and those systems, and making sure that we can keep all of those things kind of flowing. And so that's one of the big things that I think I do in my work. And one of the wonderful things about bringing on the housing navigator is that I got into this work to work with my youth. You know, our landlords, I am so grateful for their partnership. And I have some wonderful landlords that I, you know, love giving out recommendations to people and saying, like, you know what, when you get housed with this landlord, you know, you're going to be safe. Things are going to be okay. Where I think that there's a lot of other youth out there who don't have the support of housing case management and our Pathfinders programs that can't say that. You know, they're dealing with a lot of issues around bed bugs or, you know, some of these things, and they don't have anyone to advocate for them to get that taken care of. Where, you know, I have a relationship with our landlord. So if that becomes an issue, I can call that landlord and they know and respect me enough to get that work done. And also I know and respect that landlord enough to know that they're going to get that work done. I'm not putting my clients into a situation where that becomes an issue. that's not being addressed.
Yeah, and just to like, I am not the expert when it comes to that navigating the housing. So, but I have to like echo that what kind of Janelle and Veronica and Tim were saying, as far as like, there have been relationships that have been created, and even me coming in is fairly new still. And I can also benefit from those relationships that have been made. And so like to know that sending a client to a certain space is going to benefit them and not like can pretty much hurt them. So I appreciate that this like the team has created those relationships, and that's very, very helpful.
What I hear from the comments that you all made is that it's definitely, the relationship is important with our landlord, but it's important in order to maintain the stability for our young people. And that is paramount. Being here to support our young people is the number one goal. And one of the ways that we do that is by building strong landlord relationships, which is why it has been so necessary. Tim's going to talk to us a little later about the expansion of our housing program this year and why that was such a critical position. I think you guys just illustrated right now how important that position is, because to your point, Veronica, you're here to support young people. And we want that to be as much a part of your job as possible, not the management of all the other relationships outside of that young person. So that's a really eye-opening conversation. And I'm glad you all shared those details, because I don't think people would know that. And I think it looks different depending on what housing organization you're at. Again, I think it's really special what we do. And some of those things that you talked about, like a landlord issue or a challenge with a tenant, that might be something that a young person would lose their housing for. So how we do it is just as important as what we're doing.
That is so important. It emphasizes a key element of Housing First, which is we will do whatever we can to help a young person not get evicted. And that does involve really strong relationships with landlords and the ability to negotiate something that is mutually agreeable, so that our young people don't begin to build eviction records on top of all the other challenges they're already experiencing. And we are exceptionally effective at that. It sometimes means a lot of additional work with our case managers having to move youth on more than one occasion in some cases. But it really is an effort to keep housing first and foremost in our work, so that evictions do not become yet another barrier to subsequent independence and self-sufficiency.
I think one of the big things that I run into with that, and Janelle mentioned it, is, sometimes there's no way for us to communicate after we've put in those applications to see where they're standing. And it can be months. And for our youth who already struggle to trust the systems that are put in place, that becomes a huge barrier. And it means that if they are not, getting that feedback and being treated fairly in those systems, then they don't reach out for help when they need it the next time. And that makes our work harder when we are then trying to help them the next time. And rightfully so, if they continue to be pushed out of systems and that they are trying to access, they're not going to reach out for help again.
I think, our colleagues at SDC and Community Advocates, which were the two agencies that were called upon early on when the CARES Act funding was released, to really bring to scale the ability to provide rental assistance in an effort to prevent homelessness. They tried to ramp up very quickly. And I think we all learned also very quickly just how great the need was, and just the level of housing instability, which we often forget about. We focus so much on who's already homeless that we forget that in a much greater part of our community is actually just on the edge of becoming homeless. They have such high levels of housing instability. And these were the folks trying to get rental assistance. And early on, the process was not clear, and the waiting list got really long, really fast. And I think Janelle and Veronica both said, this was sometimes months waiting. How can you wait for months when you are about to become evicted? And this was before moratoriums went into place. And so it was a perfect storm of exceptional need, with resources finally coming to bear on that, but without the infrastructure to really manage that huge demand. And I think it is indicative of us as a community continuing to struggle with a problem with enough affordable housing. You look at our housing costs relative to other parts of the country, and it looks like we're in pretty good shape. But when we look at our employment rates, our income rates, we fall to the very bottom of the entire country in terms of just where we rank relative to lack of affordable housing. And so that, I think, illustrates why there were so many people in our community who were so precariously housed that they were desperate for that kind of assistance. And, Janelle pointed out earlier, you can wait a long time to finally get your application processed, and then it may only be a month or two of assistance, and then you have to start over. And a lot of our young people are just not developmentally equipped to be able to deal with that and manage through that on their own. And that's an ongoing challenge. I mean, more of the more recent funding allows for a greater period of support, but the bottom line is that is all temporary support. And it always leaves the big question of, and then what? What comes next? Because this doesn't solve housing instability. It simply addresses it in the short term.
And I like to add too, just the funds are great because it is helping folks pay back rent, help with utility payments. But this is a Band-Aid almost to the bigger picture because folks are being housed without case management or without support if they're not going through a program or through an agency. So folks are having these struggles constantly because it's, okay, who do I turn to next if I don't have, a case manager or a supportive person in my life or someone to help me navigate these really tough systems because they're very tricky. So the funding is great, but then what happens when folks are housed for 12 months without someone checking up on them or reminding them of deadlines or preparing them for what's going to happen next?
That's such an important point because prior to the COVID funding, there has been so little resource that has been allowed to be used for homelessness prevention. So we know of all of these households and all of these individuals who are just one step away from becoming homeless, but a lot of our funding says they have to be homeless before they qualify. And much of the funding has been, not only do you have to be homeless, you have to be chronically homeless. You have to be homeless for a very long period of time before you're eligible. So our inability to marshal the resources to do homelessness prevention to the degree our community needs is why there are this large a number of households and people who they're getting temporary rental support right now through COVID funding, but they need programmatic support and case management. And they have not, up until COVID, been deemed eligible for any of that resource.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Tim talked a little bit about the infrastructure, and then we just talked about lack of support of that. And that's one of the things I think that clients are feeling the most right now. And one of the reasons that I'm really grateful to work for Pathfinders, because when we take on housing clients, we take it very seriously. And I feel supported by administration in that, I know other case managers who have 20 plus clients. And we make sure that we maintain smaller caseloads. I have a caseload of 10. So that means I can provide my clients the support that they need so that when they exit the program, they're ready to be independent. And if there are clients that aren't ready to be independent, we don't let them fall through the cracks because we have the time and resources to make sure that they don't.
You've all sort of outlined a lot of challenges, a lot of good challenges. They're real things that are happening, and we want to make sure that we're sharing that. I'm wondering, in this change, of the world and how we're delivering services, or in what's you know, maybe some temporary funding that is offered. Is there any bright spot? Do each of you have maybe a bright spot? Why don't you
Yeah.
go first, Milton?
So I guess one of the like blessings I think in this all has been I guess to the temporary housing that has kind of come available, especially with having the hotels available for clients who are homeless. I've been very fortunate. Like I think it's just been very fortunate that clients are like we're not leaving as many people outside. It's my understanding that in the past that sometimes we had to just accept that reality that we didn't have a space for people. So working with like Jody over at 211 has been like very, very beneficial for clients that I've encountered that are homeless. And you just need a space until we can figure out what their permanent situation will be. So that has been like a blessing in disguise, like just so that we know that they're not outside, they have a warm place to be. So yeah.
Does that also give you a little better of an advantage of connecting more regularly?
Definitely. It you know where they are and they're safe and they're warm and you don't have to like go around the city looking for them and like so you and they also are a lot more. It also helps build that trust between you and the client because whereas prior to, I guess, then you would have to still communicate with the client that you didn't necessarily have a housing resource for and you were still working on it. Whereas like now they look at you as a person who was able to get them housed temporarily until you were able to find a permanent housing situation. And so that helps really build that like sustainable relationship between you and the client as well, I feel. So
I'd like to add, I'm glad Milton brought it up because it's super important to stay in contact with young people, especially young people who would otherwise fall through the cracks, or a spot may come up for housing and we may not have a way of contacting them, or they may not have access to a phone or some means to communicate with us. So it's really nice that that temporary resource is available because then there's so many eyes on the person in a good way so that folks can stay connected, folks can have the resources that they need, and it's easier to be able to get them into housing without missing deadlines, without having to, request extensions, those kinds of things. So it's definitely been very, very helpful. It's a limited resource, but it's what's available, and that has definitely been put to good use.
Where we would see a lot of pushback from our clients about accessing shelters just due to a lot of trauma, and that congregated living space is very hard for anyone to navigate, but especially when you're in this age range where you're trying to gain your independence, and where these hotel vouchers, I've seen a lot less pushback because they have a little bit more independence and their own space. And so it helps so much more to go to bed at night knowing that my clients are somewhere warm and safe.
That really has been an opportunity for us at Pathfinders. We are one of 4 agencies that through the CARES Act funding have been able to hire community-based case managers. So Emily Cruz is our community-based case manager, and along with Milton and our street outreach team, that gives us a designated case manager to keep that engagement and that connection with young adults who are placed in hotels. And Milton said it, I think, so well, that not only in the winter months is putting somebody in a hotel life-saving, but to Veronica's point, it also provides safety from transmission of the virus that has been of ongoing concern in the congregate care settings that most shelters operate within. And so it was an opportunity that hadn't existed prior, to really make sure that people were reachable, that we could stay connected, that they were safe, and that we could facilitate a more efficient transition into something more permanent. Because in years past, it was this constant trying to relocate people, knowing a lot of people were on the streets and in really life-threatening situations.
And before we go, I do want to ask Tim if he could speak just briefly about our housing expansion. We are doubling, we've been talking about this for a while, toward the end of last year. With some grants and some private dollars, we're able to double our housing work. It doesn't cover everything. There's still gaps in that funding. But tell us a little bit about how the team is ramping up and sort of what that onboarding process looks like, to build the infrastructure to double double that work this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can only imagine Veronica and her colleagues within our supported housing. Their heads must be spinning just in terms of how quickly we're trying to ramp up and grow both the staff and the capacity to serve more young people. And we often frame it as we're doubling the number of young people we anticipate serving compared to last year. It's actually more than that, a little bit to my surprise, but that was really under the leadership of the supported housing team, who said we can actually serve even more than doubling. So we are moving from about 40 youth and young adults that we served in 2020 to a projected 100 young people. And that's not including the children of many of these young parents. A lot of people don't realize about half of the young people we're serving in supportive housing are heads of household and have children with them. So they are families that we are serving, and not just individual young people. But the temporary funding that has become available, we are putting to best use in bringing on more case managers, having more rental support and housing cost support available, so that we can build that expansion of the number of young people served. So we're exceptionally proud of that, but there are a couple of really important caveats to that. Number one, as we've been talking about, this is temporary funding. And it always begs the question, and what comes after that? As an organization, we don't expand without an eye towards sustainability. And we know that will be a challenge, but we do not start and stop things just based on limited availability or time limited availability of funding. When we make that commitment, we hold to that commitment. And so that's our challenge in the years ahead. The other challenge is, when we braid funding streams, which we are very good at doing, we always have to be mindful of which funding allows for covering what costs and what clients. And we braid them to maximize the number of young people we can serve. Because often a particular funder will say, you can serve this type of young person, but not that. Or you can pay for this, but not that. And we know that's not how it really works. And so, this has been an added challenge for how we appropriately and carefully relative to COVID funding, how we braid that into the other work we're doing, knowing that at some point we're going to have to look beyond the temporary funding and look to sustainability.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for what you do every day for young people. And thank you so much for sharing with us just a snapshot of what this looks like. It's so important to demystify some of these things and really have people understand what's at the heart of supporting young people and what that really looks like on a day-to-day basis.